everyone, Stephanie Giannini from IVATI. Welcome back to my channel. And today we have an episode of IVATI Invites. Today I'd like to introduce Jenna Wilson of Career Civility, who's a communications consultant. Thank you for coming on the show.
It's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
To begin, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Okay, what a big question. Where do I start? Well, again, my name is Jenna Wilson. I am the founder of Career Civility. I also work as an employer brand specialist at Glassdoor as well. So essentially, my passion is communication and improving workplace relations and giving people tactical communication tips in order to better their team environment, their leadership skills, and the overall productivity of organizations. But I also have that branding expertise as well, where I'm helping clients attract and retain great talent at their organizations. So all in all, I like to say that my why is helping people connect and communicate more effectively, whether that's through hiring, storytelling, or even just in a one-on-one conversation with family members, friends, and then colleagues as well.
So talk about a lot of great experience and skills that you can utilize in so many different areas, especially personal and professional. IVATI is all about the intersect between personal and professional leadership development. So you're going to be so valuable on this episode, and I can't wait to dive in. So how has your leadership identity and journey unfolded throughout your career?
Oh man, I love leadership because it's such a unique topic, and I think it's always changing and evolving. And that's one of the reasons that I love learning from IVATI and the principles and the content that you're bringing, because people always used to tell me, even when I was like in elementary school, that you're a natural born leader. People look to you, you have this essence about yourself that, attracts people. And I've kind of been like, whatever. And then when I got into my career, I've actually never gravitated towards a people management role. Being a people leader is hard. It's really hard work. I don't feel like I'm great at it. So when, the principles of IVATI come into play, it's like, okay, well, you can actually change leadership from being, a topic of a people manager to being a leader in your own way. Especially, with Career Civility, I am a one-woman show, and I am, running trainings and consulting programs, and you do have to be a leader in your own sense. So when I look at my own leadership journey, it's having to reframe the definition of leadership and then also like my identity with it. Because I always thought leadership meant management. And that isn't true anymore. So, working with you, working with other thought leaders in the space, I'm really fortunate that I have a lot of women around me who are lifting me up and helping me understand that, leadership is what you make it. As long as you are helping people, you're serving others, and you're creating good examples for what it's like to do good work in the world, I think that has been a new leadership identity that I've been taking on, but ask me in a year, and it might be different.
Well, I think what I love about that is you touch on the fact that there is no right way to be a leader. And I don't think we're necessarily taught that in school growing up. I think many people still have that misconception of what being a leader is. There is no right way to be a leader. There's definitely ways to be a bad leader, and we know that, and we see that. But there's different ways to lead, and different types of leaders work in different situations and different settings. And so I love how you had to go through that whole journey of viewing yourself as a leader. And I think that's the hardest part for people, because they associate it with management.
Yep.
And they associate it, if you don't have 10 people that directly report to you, then you're not a leader. And that's not the case. How does civil communication play a role in effective leadership, both in the personal and professional sense?
What a great question, and I get so fired up about civil communication because it is something that I love so much. I do want to start with just defining what civil communication is, so that way then I can play that into how it affects leadership. Civil communication, in my own words, is communicating productively. I always start every talk out or every speech out by saying, everyone knows that communication is the skill of the century, right? It is what employers look for in employees. It's what, your therapist will tell you makes every great relationship. And there's a lot of talk about communication, but I think it's kind of become arbitrary. No one really knows what good communication looks like, right? So my entire, study and passion is civil communication, which is communicating productively. So if we think about civil communication in a leadership sense, we can take it one step further and communicate productively while acknowledging the humanity of others. And I know that sounds really heavy and it sounds like a lot, but if you are a leader, you consider yourself a leader, you're in a leadership role, you have to work with others, right? And in order to effectively work with others, you need to understand what makes them tick, what their passions are, their why, what they're really good at. And you're able to cultivate those pieces of them and that humanity of the other. And then in every conversation you have with them, it resonates a little bit more. When you ask them for help, it resonates a little bit more. When you have to confront them, it resonates a little bit more. So I think, civil communication in a leadership capacity is really that secret ingredient that drives connection and drives that will for someone to want to work for you.
I love that. I feel like you hit the nail on the head with how, in my opinion, and I think many could argue, how communication could essentially be the determining factor if you are an effective leader or not. Yeah. Because you might make great decisions, you might be a great problem solver, you come up with the most out-of-the-box solutions. But if you can't communicate any of that properly, if you can't deal with conflict in a productive way, no one's going to want to be a quote-unquote follower of you. You're going to just lead poorly. And a lot of times that's where I think leaders may struggle in that sense, because communication is hard. And it's funny because it's true. People are like, oh, communication, it's so important. But communication's hard. Yeah. It's very hard. I know firsthand how hard it is. I oftentimes struggle to get what I want to say to come out the right way. Or people are very reactive, or people are very avoidant. They don't want to communicate at all. And that can really determine if you are somebody people want to lead them, or you're somebody that I always say people either run towards leaders or run from them. Like poor leadership, you might have people running from you. Exactly.
Well, I would say that I'm also here to give communication majors a better reputation, because I think that, when people go to school and they major in communications, it's looked down on. It's that easy major, but then when they get into the workplace, they're so much more effective than you ever would have thought. And yes, it's not, hey, I have a CPA, or hey, I have, a PhD or my law degree, whatever it may be, but they are able to stand up and give a presentation a lot easier than some other people are. And they are able to be a catalyst to deliver those ideas. So while they may not be that programmer sitting at a computer every day, they are the person talking to leadership, being like, this is a brand new program that we need to implement, and here's why. They give the reasons X, Y, and Z, and they're standing up for not only the programmer who cannot communicate their ideas, but they're also being that conduit between what leadership sees as a goal or as a business requirement that needs to be delivered to stakeholders, and they're able to marry both of those together, which ultimately helps the productivity, the revenue, and the bottom line of an organization.
That's so true. We do need to give communication. I remember that stereotype. Yeah. Well, she's proof that stereotype's not true. So I want to dive into this past year, 2020, and I feel like this year has just put everyone through the ringer. And it was a very unique year because so much happened. We had the pandemic. Well, we still have the pandemic. We have the civil rights movement. We had the election, which was very tough. So I want to know from your perspective how you saw civil communication play out, or maybe not play out, this past year.
Whew, what a heavy question. But thank you for asking. I think sometimes the hard questions need to be asked because people are afraid to think about them even. Also plug for my newsletter, because I do talk about this stuff on a weekly basis. I like to keep current events, or I like to pair current events with communication tips. So that way what you're reading, it goes out every Friday morning. What you're reading Friday morning, you're able to implement on Monday. With 2020 came the platform to give underrepresented communities a platform to share their ideas and to give them the stage, right? And that was known as allyship. I think there was a lack of listening involved in that allyship. People went silent, but were they really listening? It was very performative in my opinion, and people don't really know what civil listening or what effective listening looks like at this point in time, right? So there's one thing we can do better, it's enact civil listening. Where did I see civil communication play out in 2020? people are talking about the damn thing, right? I mean, I hosted a webinar with the diversity movement. I don't know how long ago it was now, but before the holidays. How do you talk to Uncle Bill or Uncle Bob about your identity at the Thanksgiving table, right? That's hard, but people are doing it, and that is amazing. People are having the confidence to be able to stand up for what they believe in. They're able to, I should take this back. Some are able to do it in an effective way. Another thing that I've noticed that people have done well, I think they've been a little bit more receptive to having these conversations. I remember when I first told someone that it was someone that, wasn't going to support me in launching Career Civility, and was pretty judgmental about it. And they think very poorly of civility. They think that civility is almost like a synonym with compliant and being compliant, and being polite. And if you are civil, nothing is actually going to change. And I really challenged this person pretty directly and pretty hard with this notion because of what was going on in 2020. Civility is a way to be able to get your ideas out there and to be able to state your identity with confidence, but while also not disturbing the perspective or opinions of another person, right? You can't go head to head all the time because you're either going to get nowhere or something's going to implode. Sometimes implosions are great for change, but ultimately, like if you're sitting at the Thanksgiving table, you don't want to start throwing stuffing across the room just to get your point, right? But you also don't want to sit there and not feel welcomed. So how do you communicate to your uncle, to your family members effectively while not disrupting the entire energy of the room? So that's been one thing, if there is one takeaway or another takeaway, I should say, of this year, it's that civil communication is so needed to be a vehicle to create change without just having it blow up in your face.
First off, if you haven't seen the webinar she was on, I was on it. It was great about the holidays.
Thank you.
I absolutely loved it because I do think that's where people struggle. And I'm sorry anyone ever, this is life, push back on civility with you because I think it is so important more than ever. And it's crazy because you see people thinking that going head to head is always going to work, and it doesn't, but they still think it's they say if you do the same thing enough times without different results, that's just insanity. Yep. Like if it's not working, then we got to try something else. And I love the focus that you said on people aren't listening as much. And I know it's hard. It's so hard to listen. And I'm somebody too, when you're a talker or you're in your head, you're always trying to think of like the next thing you're going to say. And not because you don't care, but I think it's just natural habit. You just want to be ready for like the response. And I think you show such great example, even in our own conversation. You and I, we love to dive into deep topics. We like enjoy it, and I know people don't like it, but we do. And why I like discussing topics with you and getting your opinions on things is because we take the time to just pause and listen and actually dissect what the other person said and say, where can I agree with that? Where can I not agree with that? Mm-hmm. And how can I communicate that I might want to challenge you on something? But in the same breath, I might want to agree with you on parts of it.
One of my professors in grad school just said it so perfectly. And listen to be challenged, not to respond. As Stephanie was just saying, we're always thinking our next rebuttal, or we're listening to them and understanding like where we can kick them in the gut with our response. That way we're right. But if you just take a quick breath and just sit there and say, okay, I don't want to respond right now. I just want to be challenged. Here's my worldview. So like, how can my worldview be challenged right now? And just taking that beat. So listen to be challenged as opposed to responding. And then the second thing is asking those questions, tell me more. You can also ask, okay, so what I'm hearing is. And what I'm hearing is such a great way to not be passive aggressive, but to really give them the floor to speak further. Because there are a lot of times, you talked about it yesterday, sometimes people just don't get their ideas out in the best way, right? So you don't have to, crucify them for that. You can just say, can you elaborate? So there's ways that you can continue to ask these questions and engage without being passive aggressive and to really, fine tune your own listening skills.
So with that being said, what do you think is the biggest mistake people are making when discussing these very hot topics or potentially taboo topics?
Well, I think the biggest mistake right now is social media.
Facts.
We talk about that very often. Social media is so emotion provoking, it's sticky, it gives everyone a platform. I've actually limited my use on social media because of it. I've lost followers because I've said, I don't care who you vote for, I will still be friends with you. And I stand tall and stand true to that statement. I believe that everyone has different experiences and different perspectives, and it's our duty to honor those. Everyone has their own story, so just take a second and listen, regardless of, where you believe. Because at the end of the day, like, you can still vote for who you want to vote for, but you can give someone else a space to give them their story. So circling it back, I'll get off my platform there. Social media, I think, is a really hard place to engage on these heated topics. So while I'm not deterring anyone from doing so, I think there's a respectful way to do it. I think there's a way that works for other people. What works for me is not going to work for you necessarily. But there is one piece of advice that I would give, and maybe this is taboo, but if you are going to use your platform to share your opinion and your story, I think it's only fair to let other people do the same. The other thing where I don't think people are doing it right is in the workplace. I think a lot of people are shying away from having these conversations at work, and that's totally unfair to your workforce. There are people going to work every day and they have no idea what other people are going through, right? So whether it's in your team meetings or whether it's in one-on-ones, give space to ask those questions and, lay the groundwork that, hey, you don't need to engage or you don't need to respond, but I just want to check in with you. Just know that you have someone on your side. So if you do have a family member who is sick or who has recently passed away, or who is dealing with the weight of this civil rights movement, just give them some space to breathe. Not every meeting needs to be, hey, we have 2 weeks until this project needs to be finished. It can literally just be 5 minutes of like, hey, I know we're strapped for time on this project, but like, how are you as a human today? Like, that sounds so trivial.
Such a little thing to do,
exactly.
But so impactful.
So impactful. And I was someone who, you talked to me about therapy, you talked to me about journaling. I'm like, I don't need that. I was so hard-headed. But, taking the time to be like, hey, do you need to write your thoughts down really quick? Like, you don't need to email it to me. Here's a piece of paper, like, write it down. And that could just be a team building exercise that you do, where it's just putting pen to paper and having people, even if it's behind Zoom, having people go get up and take a piece of paper, and you might roll your eyes at it at first, but even just giving that 5 minutes at the beginning of every one-on-one or team meeting, because you do need to bring it into the workplace. People cannot just check their identity at the door anymore. They can't check the trauma that's happening outside in the workplace today, because it blends. Your office is in your home right now. Like, there are no boundaries. It is blending together. So run with that, embrace it. And I think it'll not only make you a better person and a better leader, but it'll help the workplace evolve and be innovative as well.
Well, there are two things I want to touch on that from both kind of segments that you had talked about. And one with the social media, it makes me think of someday, I think I follow on Twitter, and she writes a lot of very, I wouldn't say motivational, but kind of, challenges what's going on in the world. And she said, you can't demand respect and empathy for your experience if you're not willing to give it to others, even if it pains you, even if you can't grasp it, if you feel that it's so wrong in what they're experiencing. It doesn't mean you need to agree, but you, like you said, if you there's a respectful way to share your opinion and share your experiences, but in doing so, you also need to do that for others, because you're inviting people in and you need to give them the same respect. And the other thing that I love that you said is, I'm all about, as I had said earlier, the personal and professional world. I'm working from home part-time, but you've had to work from home full-time, and it's like no boundaries. It's insane. It's like your break is to go sit on the couch that's 2 feet away from you.
Yeah.
So literally no boundaries, which is so hard for people. And so I love, especially as this relates to leadership, like, leaders need to show compassion more than ever right now. And I think why that's so key too is, like, the pandemic is affecting everyone right now. It's not just affecting certain people. It's affecting the actual workplace. And so to pretend it doesn't exist and let's just focus on our numbers, that's just not reality. And I think, as you had said, just that checking in with people is so, so valuable. I know when we brought our teams back for the school year, which I work in school districts for those who don't know, so school's just a hot mess right now. But with that, I remember telling my team, feel what you need to feel. And they know I'm always like, I'm the mushy, feely one. And they're like, can we just go do our job? But I told them, whether you're angry, sad, whatever you need to feel it, because if you just suppress it like this, I'm not bringing you here to tell you to just forget about it. Yeah. Feel it so then we can move on from it and we can, have our ups and downs, but get through the day. So I love that you really encourage that. And I wish more people would encourage that. And hopefully that's happening now, especially since, as you had said, people are working from home. There's a lot of virtual aspects. So you're almost missing that, that face-to-face time and that compassion or that warmth that you would normally feel from people.
One note I do want to make, because we're very opposite in that sense. Like, I love work. I just throw myself into it because it is that escape, right? It's something where it makes sense. It's black and white. You do your job. You know what to do. You don't have to bring emotions into it. So I really have to check myself to give other people that space, right? Like, it is so against my work ethic and how I operate in the workplace. So you do, depending on who you are, it's like you kind of have to oh no, we need to work right now, as opposed to we just need to chat. And I'm like, why are we chit-chatting? We need to get to work. So being able to understand that about yourself too, and flex depending on the situation that you're in. And 2020 is a year where I've needed to flex and not just jump in right to work right away, and be able to say, oh, how are things? You're probably working till 9 p.m. just because you are sitting on your couch, which is right next to your desk, right? So that's my last piece to add there.
I think that's key. It also goes back to boundaries. I feel as though you almost had to loosen boundaries, and which I've had to learn many ways how to tighten boundaries, because I'm somebody who wants to hear about your grandma, and which it's good. I want to hear about your grandma, your dog, your everything. Sometimes I need to set those boundaries because it's too personal, and now we can't get in the work zone. And especially when you do have to give tough feedback or conversation, when you have no boundaries, that is so hard. So I appreciate that. Yeah. So I want to dive in a little bit deeper into social media, because I feel as though we're both passionate about this topic, and how, yes, there's a lot of good that comes from social media, but I feel like social media has totally turned the tables on how at least our current society works. Used to be, we had these topics that we never talked about, that should be talked about, that people didn't feel comfortable enough to speak up, that things that were taboo are no longer taboo, which is good. But I also feel that we went from 0 to 100, where now people constantly feel the need to express, constantly feel like that if you don't speak up on something, then you don't care. And you almost need to prove to people that you do care, because if you don't say anything, then you're silent. And this is from all various different topics, not even any of the big main topics going on right now. But I feel that's going back to people not listening. It's very one-way communication. People are constantly giving their unsolicited opinion on things. Every little thing. And it used to be that people would do their own research, get all the facts before they would engage in conversation, because when you're face-to-face, you want to be prepared. Where now it's people grab any little headline and it's bam, and they're going off, and they're not really talking to anybody because they're just posting. So what I want to ask from you is, what's your opinion on this? Do you feel social media has been a hindrance, and do you believe there is such a thing as over communicating?
Interesting. So
another loaded question.
So I think about that in two parts. I'll get to the over communicating in just a second, but when it comes to social media, if I think about it in this way: if you are going to repost something, or if you're going to post something, make sure that you are also implementing it into your everyday life. So if you are going to post something in relation to the civil rights movement and being an ally, make sure that if someone makes a microaggression at work or makes a joke about your friend, that you're standing up for that friend, even if they're not in the room. So make sure that you're checking yourself. So if you're posting that, just think back to your last week and the conversations that you've had. And if someone has made a black joke or OCD joke, or they're being discriminatory, to be honest, did you call them out, or did you just giggle? And I do want to bring my own personal anecdote into this, because as someone who preaches, civil communication, it's really hard for me too. So it's really hard for me in my own identity. I grew up I am biracial, and I grew up as a kid who had a really hard time fitting in and understanding my identity. I didn't identify as Black because kids told me you don't have black hair, you don't have black hops, you don't have dance moves. But then I didn't identify as white because I'm so dark. So it was really hard for me to fit in. I learned how to almost I wrote a piece on this, chameleon under my privilege, but also under my skin color. And I didn't stand up, when kids would say I'm an Oreo or I'm an Oreo, I didn't stand up to that. Even today, if I meet someone new out at work and someone makes a joke, not even towards me, but just about someone else, my first reaction is to laugh. And just kind of brush it off like it never happened. But you really do have to, challenge yourself to maybe you laugh it off in that moment and then you think oh, that wasn't right. And then, later on you bring it up hey, I remember when you made that joke, I don't know if you know the significance of it, but, it kind of hurt my feelings, or it could have potentially hurt someone else's feelings. I don't want to call you out. That's kind of why I pulled you to the side, but, it would be nice if you were just mindful of that in the future. It's way easier said than done. I realize that, but again, if you're going to post it on social media, make sure that you're implementing it into your everyday life, because that's where the hard work happens. So that's a very personal answer to your question. In regards to over communicating, I love to talk. I don't know if over communicating is really in my vocabulary, but in a sense, yes. And the reason that I say yes is because I want to bring you into the context of civil dialogue. So civil dialogue is a sub-study, if you will, of civil communication, and it is a format where you are in person. There is a facilitator. There are 5 participants. There is an audience. It is very performative, but it is so impactful in your communities, in an organization. This is something I do with clients as I actually implement these dialogues. I'm the facilitator. There's an issue or a hot topic, if you will, that is introduced, and people have to figure out where their perspective is in regards to that hot topic. So you give a statement. There is 5 chairs: strongly agree, neutral or undecided, disagree, and strongly disagree. So there are 5 standpoints that you can take. In this regard, it's set up so that way it's designed to give people the floor. It's designed to spark dialogue. It's also designed to give listening. So when we don't have that in-person dialogue and we only have social media, I don't know if it's over communicating, but I almost think it's over projecting. And overload of opinions, right? So social media is just a different vehicle to be able to communicate, and there's pros and cons. But if you're able to be weary of how you're engaging in those conversations or how you're engaging in different opinions, that's, I think, the key. So you can use your platform to do whatever you want. On my personal Instagram, I'm not talking about any hot topics. I may dabble here and there, but again, as I'd mentioned, I still have trouble doing that because I still have trouble standing up for my identity and what I believe in. On Career Civility, I'm doing my best to gain confidence to be able to talk about these polarizing and taboo topics in the hopes that it'll help other people. So find out what works for you. Be sure to be intentional with it, as IVATI loves to talk about, and I think is so powerful, because if you are intentional about it, if you're respectful about it, there's a great way to engage.
I love everything you just said. And the reason I love it is because, one, you show that you still struggle with it. I mean, this is tough stuff. Even the experts struggle with it because communication is so, it's real, it's raw, it reflects you as a person. It can go from very civil to very not civil with the wrong word, the wrong misinterpretation. And I like how you struggle within your own life, but I think that's key because you can relate firsthand to people who are struggling with it. And what I also really like that you do is why I think career civility is so important in the work that you do is because it's not that people necessarily are afraid to or don't believe in it, but they really just don't know how to do these things or confront people in a way that they don't want to end friendships. They don't, maybe, like you said, I love that example you gave of, hey, do you understand the significance behind that? You may have hurt somebody. I pulled you to the side. And that's just such a respectful way, because in that same breath, you also aren't making assumptions about their intention or that they fully understood or grasped the effect that they had. Because I think that's another thing that people get wrong is people make assumptions and it's like, you meant to say that, you meant to hurt me. And sometimes people don't, and people are ignorant. Things slip out. Sometimes things slip out of me and I'm like, oh, okay. Why did I just say that? That's not what I meant. And so I love the way that you give such valuable examples on how to do so in a way that's respectful, that you can grow with a person from that experience versus just, the easy thing would be to just cut everyone off, but then you'd just be you and yourself, and then you have no one to communicate with. The attention piece, as you know, we're huge on intention here. And so maybe it's not that there's such a thing as over communicating, but there's such a thing as over poorly communicating.
Or frivolously communicating. Yeah, because it becomes empty. And to your point of, how it can escalate, I've been in those conversations. So there is a relationship in my life that has escalated over a racial conversation that we still aren't there yet. I can't have a conversation with this person because it's too sensitive. There's trauma there. And I tried. I think we tried. It was too heated of a conversation, and that's okay too. There's all this talk of like, you need to engage. If you're not doing this, if you can't do it right now, that's okay too. This is heavy stuff. Mm-hmm. Not everyone needs to have an answer for something. Sometimes you just have to bow out. And that's one thing we talked about in the webinar before the holidays is like, give yourself a break, like understand your boundaries. And if a boundary is crossed, like, don't feel guilty of not engaging anymore. So that's something to think about as well. Like, understand your boundaries, whether it's with your family members, whether it's with friends, whether it's on social media. Understand those boundaries and really hold yourself to those boundaries, because it's going to ultimately obviously be better for your mental health. But then also, it's going to make you a better communicator, because you know that you're not going to dip your toe into that water, because it will escalate and it will blow up. So communicate that and know that.
When you were talking, I was thinking about the diversity movement webinar. Seriously, you need to watch it, because I think I had actually texted you and said, I love how they not only talked about engaging, but how you don't always have to engage. If it's too much, if it's becoming hurtful, if it's damaging your mental health, if you can no longer feel welcomed at the table that you're at, then it's okay to not engage. And I like that too. It's almost, it's feeling that you don't always need to throw yourself in the battle, in the fire. And doesn't make you any less of a communicator, doesn't make you any less of an ally, doesn't make you any less of, fighting the good fight. It's just sometimes it's just not the right time. And you knowing when to just bow out, because nothing good's going to come from it.
Yep. If it's not going to be productive, is it worth your energy?
So I personally think in today's society, we love to put people into little boxes, little neat boxes with their identities, assumptions about them. We love to label. And I think a lot of this goes back to just how the brain works. We are constantly processing information. So it's easier to just put people in you're this, you're that, because it's easier for us. And I wonder how you view this growing up in a diverse household, both politically and racially. And I think that's such a great experience, because not everyone has that. And I want to hear your perspective on that, because I feel as though people are now entering this habit of almost surrounding themselves with people who are just like them. And I talk a lot about like echo chambers. I think we're creating them too easily, especially on social media, but we'll get off that topic. But I think we only want to engage with people who are just like us, because it's easier for us to look at somebody who's different and say, if you vote for this, if you follow this religion, if you look like this, then every other assumption I can make about you, you're fit in that box. So how have you used your experience to communicate with people who are different than you?
Yeah. Whew. I'm like getting nervous.
I'm like, am I making her sweat
with these questions? I think my identity and my background is my differentiating factor, right? It's really unique where I come from, and I don't want to say I was ashamed of it growing up. I just didn't know what to do with it because I did want to fit in. You're a teenager and you do want to fit in. We need to be in communities and we need to fit in to be these communities because outcasts, survival of the fittest, no one's going to have your back, yada, yada. So growing up, my dad's black, my mom's white, my dad's Democrat, my mom's a Republican. It was just so divided. And growing up, I think twofold. I learned two things. Number one, that they can coexist. Like, our world is so binary right now, and as someone who's lived that experience, it doesn't need to be like that, right? So bringing awareness to that and telling my story, because a lot of people, when they meet me, I'd like to think that they like me, so once I get in with them, then I can tell them, like, hey, I'm actually different than you, or explain my background and how I grew up, and hey, that person is cool, she seems like a good person, and if she grew up with that, I can accept others who had a different childhood than I did or came from a different background. So that's kind of the easy way, is I try to get people to like me, and then I'm like, haha, I'm actually different. But the other way is I grew up not really talking about things, and being an observer and listening and really soaking it all in. And I think that also sets me apart in today's world, because I am able to look at someone, maybe not like what they say on the, on set, and then dig a little bit deeper. So I think I have those two layers of, I'm different. I understand that there's diverse makeups and families and dynamics out there, and that they can work. And then I also come from an observation background where I'm able to listen and synthesize and understand and problem solve because of that. Because we can, one of the things I love so much is storytelling, right? If you're just able to ask someone's story and to listen to someone's story, you don't know what they've gone through. And just that one experience gives them this wisdom or this light that just paves the way for their life. And without knowing that, you kind of lose your empathy towards other people. So that was a lot. My identity is something I struggle with. It's very vulnerable. I get nervous just, thinking about it, because I do struggle with it. But storytelling and listening and understanding, those are all just so powerful.
Totally, because you touch on being curious. And I think that's key, especially with storytelling. I think sometimes people don't want to engage with those that are different, because it will challenge what they thought about them. It's easier to be like, I'm right, and so I'm not going to engage with you because I might end up liking you, or I might end up having common ground. I would say you were very blessed to grow up in a diverse household, because I know I didn't. My parents believe politically the same thing. They were the same race. So you grow up in kind of this little bubble. And I would say it wasn't until maybe high school and especially college that I met people so different from what I grew up in. And I loved it. When you become curious about people and you want to hear their stories, you realize how really, as much as we're the same, you'll realize how similar you are to people, but you also realize how different people's experiences are. And I really encourage people to be curious and, like you said, have empathy, because if you can find some common ground, and it doesn't mean that you believe the same things, but you can see somebody and say, wow, you're actually human just like me. I am sure we could find something that we can connect with anybody. I mean, I'm sure there's some that maybe nothing, but I think that's key. And I also I know it's hard, the vulnerability piece, but that's another one of IVATI's 5 actions. And it's hard, but I love that you express that vulnerability, that identity is hard. I think it's hard for a lot of people, and especially when you're dealing with multiple identities and you don't feel enough for one, you don't feel enough for the other. I know I struggle politically with identity because I don't feel strongly about either side, and we're in a society that's you're this or that. And so it's hard. And I love that you show that vulnerability, and I've seen how much you've grown in it. And I think talking about it more and sharing with others, hey, I'm struggling with this, but also using it as a means to engage with others and how they identify. Yep. I think that's key.
And especially in the workplace, this is a leadership trait that I need to improve on. I am type A, go-getter, I will hustle. And then I work with other people who are more, laid back, they're creative, it'll get done when it gets done. And I'm oh my gosh, like that is not how I work. And I only want to hire people like me because, I just feel like they're hungry and I feel that energy and we feed off each other. And I have to check myself and be like, yo, this person who is a little bit more laid back, like give me more of those doses, because that actually makes me a better person and a better leader as well. So checking yourself to be curious, to understand that their strengths will help you. Their weaknesses might, chill you out, or, might be a strength of yours. And the other point I wanted to make to that is also this piece of like competitiveness, because I don't think people give other people the opportunity to share their stories because they don't want to seem like that person's better than them. Like people do that they like compare things all the time. Well, that person has that degree and that person's experienced that crazy thing in their life. So they've gone through a lot more than I have. So like, why would I even hold a candle to them? Like there's just like this comparison, there's this competitiveness. And I think that's a default setting. So again, challenging yourself to be like, why am I not listening to this person? Or why do I automatically label that person? Or why do I just have a weird feeling about that person?
Yeah.
So even being curious with your own self, I think, will help you in your friendships and, in the workplace as well.
Being curious with yourself. I think if you can do everything with yourself first, it's going to help you to do it with others. And I never thought about that competitiveness, but it's true. Or it's like it's almost like to relate to people, you try and, not that everyone does this, but like one up them. Like, and it's a means to connect, but it's like sometimes can you just stop and just listen? Like you don't need to have it harder than anybody. You don't need to have it better than anybody. Yep. So that's a good point. Never thought about that.
Yeah.
Lastly, I want to look into the future. So what do you see as far as the future goes as communication? What does the world look like with more civil communication?
We all get along. We're all friends.
Kumbaya.
But in all seriousness, I think a world with more civil communication is a world that is a little bit more receptive and respectful. So receptive because new ideas are weird. I do this with my husband too. I'm like, hear me out. And so I have to like preface, I know this is crazy. I know I'm always coming up with these ideas, or we do have hard conversations too. So I'm always like, I know this is going to be really deep. But it would kind of be nice to not have to preface that and not have people think that you're crazy for bringing up this idea, or, not have to fight to tell your story. And to, I do feel like the norm today is you're fighting for people to give you space to share your identity, share your ideas and your story. And in the future, I think that space will just be there. So I know that's more of like an elusive answer. It's not a concrete answer, but I do have hope for the future. And I do think that, in a futuristic world, civil communication will be a mainstream idea, because back in the day, public relations was not a discipline, social media marketing was not a discipline, recruitment marketing was not a discipline. So mark my words, add civil communication to your disciplinary journey.
You heard it here first. But I do want to touch on how you said people being more receptive and kind of the examples you gave. Everything that's normal now was once a crazy idea and oftentimes was shot down so many times. I mean, even think about things as like Facebook and these things that we can't live without, Instagram. That all started as an out of the box idea. Now we're like, oh, these things make sense. But at the time they didn't make sense. And so like you said, people being receptive, that space is going to be there. And I hope that's what the future looks like. And maybe, you know what? I know you're going to be the one that makes civil communication mainstream. So I'm glad I could share her with you all.
Well, thanks for giving me the space to do so.
So can you tell everyone after watching this video how people can come in contact with you, how they can get a hold of you? Because I'm lucky enough to have you on speed dial 24/7, but how can others get a hold of you?
I'm pretty easy to get a hold of since I am a one-woman show. You will not have to deal with customer service.
Great.
In all seriousness, you can follow my Instagram at Career Civility. My email is Jenna, Jenna, at Career Civility. My website is www.careercivility.com. I highly encourage you to subscribe to my newsletter. So you can email me, you can find me on Instagram, and you can also find me on my website.
So you have no excuse. She's very easy to find, and I love her newsletter. So please do subscribe to it because I look forward to it every Friday. And it's funny because it says from Jenna, so I feel like I'm getting a personal email from Jenna. But I really do love it because it is relevant, and you give some great materials for people to read. So definitely do that. Follow her, reach out to her. She's seriously so great for any individual or organization. I cannot recommend her enough. And I just thank you so much for coming on to this episode. You're the second episode, which is exciting. We're getting better at this. So with that being said, that is the end of this episode of IVATI Invites, where we invite different leaders on to share their stories. And I look forward to seeing you for more episodes. So please don't forget to subscribe to my channel, follow my Instagram, and visit my website at www.ivati.net.